in general? What made you want to make films?
Oh, wow. Well,
You don't get that one too often, do you?
You know, I don't get it worded like that. I actually started making movies when I was 11 years old. My dad brought home a camera that had basically fallen off the back of a truck. And I played with it. It was one of those really big, you have to carry the VHS around on your shoulders, so I'm really dating myself. It's so funny now when you can carry it around on your phone, thinking like if I'd have had that back then, what I could have accomplished. But anyway, it became a hobby that just, continued and continued, and I never got bored of it, and it actually became an obsession. So I went to college for film, and I think because I was doing films for so long independently on my own that I really just hated the whole idea of structured learning in college. Someone telling me how to make movies, and I was like, no, screw this. So I ended up dropping out and just going out and, getting into the field and working with other directors and other mentors to try and, learn the craft and stuff. But yeah, it's always just been, it was something that kind of just dropped in my lap, and, I hadn't thought about it. I loved movies. My father used to take me, my parents were divorced at a very young age for me, so my dad would come every weekend and take me to a movie. So that was my association with my father, was going to the movies twice a week. So I saw everything that came out in this late 70s, early 80s. So my love of film was already established. But so once I got my first camera, it was like, well, now I can do this. And it just never went away.
And what about horror movies? I mean, when you were little and you got that first camera, were you making stuff like this?
I wasn't always a fan of horror films. Like, I loved Jaws and I loved Halloween when, I saw it, not when it first came out, but when it was first on cable. It was like 1981. And it wasn't until I saw a film called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I saw that in the theaters in a double feature with this other movie, Sleepaway Camp. And I know that was the first film, Sleepaway Camp. I wasn't going to stay for the second movie. And I stayed, and it was like 1982, so it's going back a ways. It was during the re-release for New Line. And that film just blew me through a wall, and I wanted to know everything about it. So that was the movie that really kind of stayed with me and made me realize, like, wow, so horror, I look back at all my favorite directors, James Cameron, John Carpenter, Spielberg, they all started with horror films. So I asked the question, like, why is everybody doing a horror film for their first movie? And the reason is because you can do it on a low budget, and when you do films on a low budget, sometimes it can, become, a problem. It takes away from the final product, but when you're doing a horror film, it can actually enhance the final product, actually give you even more street cred when you're doing it low budget. So, and also it translates to all, countries. So you can take a horror film to Japan, to Europe, and everybody gets it. Everybody gets the same experience from it. So I knew I could sell it. So that was the reason why I did horror film. It was not just that I loved horror films, but financially and being fiscally responsible to try and make another one is you got to try and make some money on the first one. So it all kind of worked out.
So you did that first horror movie, but then you did a comedy. So was that kind of your way of branching out at that point?
Well, yeah, I didn't want to be pigeonholed for sure, but I did the comedy because I knew I was going to do Bereavement afterwards. And those of you who've seen Bereavement know what a dark and ugly film it is. And I knew that I couldn't do two movies like that back to back. So I wanted to just do something a little bit lighter so people don't think I'm like a raving lunatic or something, like, oh, this guy does these really dark, disgusting films. And so that was kind of a way to break the ice, to show that I can, I'm not just one-sided. I'm a little bit more versatile than just doing these movies where people being, tied up and dismembered.
And it's funny, back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I can kind of see that in this, especially in the killers in this, 'cause it's not so much the act of being a murderer as it is being part of their lifestyle.
Well, yeah, I mean, what really, the point I wanted to get across with this film is that, you see so many horror movies that are designed to shock and to scare and to make you laugh, and I don't like my horror combined. Like, I don't like things intermixed where I'm getting, a scary scene in 1 minute and then I'm laughing about it the next minute. Because I think that betrays the true nature of the horror film in general. You're not supposed to laugh during a horror film. And with this film, I kind of took it a step further because I wanted to show the repercussions of the murder. In other words, when you kill somebody, it doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody around them. And I think that gets lost on people when they're watching a movie. And you don't necessarily want to know about that when you're watching a movie. You want to be entertained. So you sacrifice a little bit of that entertainment value by going with an approach that's a lot more realistic. But I think in the end, there's room for that type of film too, because if you look back on, everybody talks about the '70s as being the great decade of horror. Well, look at all those films. None of those films have jokes or punchlines after people are murdered. They take the subject matter very seriously, and I think that's why they're so well respected, is because they're much more focused. So that was the idea with this, is to just kind of focus my energy on telling it from a truthful standpoint. And that's also why the film is so incredibly violent, because while I was making the film, I realized in order to tell this story truthfully, I had to show it the way it would really play out.
When you made Malevolence, did you know you were making the sequel, or did that happen after the fact?
Well, when I made Malevolence, that film was originally part of a book that I wrote. So there was always 3 parts to the movie. So this story, in one form or another, has existed for like 10 years. It's certainly evolved a lot since I first wrote it. But yeah, the storyline has always been there. There's always been the story of Martin, who was kidnapped, who was kind of indoctrinated into this world with Graham Sutter. The reason I did this film second is because I knew I could never pull off the drama in this film on my first attempt, because Malevolence was my first movie. So I picked a part of the story that I could do super cheap, on my credit cards, and was mostly action. So when you've got a lot of action and a lot of reaction from the characters, it's easier to work with, a less sophisticated crew and cast, because you can kind of gloss over some of that stuff, So we're all kind of finding our way. I mean, when we made that movie, we literally were shooting, 1 or 2 takes per scene. So, there's a lot of times why that's why I've got like these big master shots with not a lot of close-ups, because we had one chance to get it. And a lot of times I hear from people, oh, the acting wasn't so good. It's like, hey, they had one shot. They didn't get 20 takes to get it right, and then the editor picks apart the greatest takes of each and makes them look fantastic. So a lot of times, it's the editing room that creates the performance. And we didn't have much of a choice. We had one take or the other take, sometimes just one take. So the fact that the film is even watchable, for me, is a testament to like, wow, we really pulled something off. Because, shooting at 35 when you've got, I think our grand budget at the end of the day was like $80,000 before we went to post, So, it's actually, I still don't know how we pulled it off. I mean, I know everybody worked for free, and, the crew didn't necessarily work for free, but they certainly weren't getting paid. It was a non-union crew, so, they didn't retire off that money. But yeah, now looking back, I'm actually pretty proud of what we were able to accomplish, considering the resources that we had to work with.
That's pretty impressive too. Like 1 or 2 takes for a horror movie is completely different than with any other. Because like you stab someone, there's blood, you ruin that person's costume.
Absolutely, absolutely. It was a real challenge, and one of the things we did to kind of overcome that challenge was there was a lot of preparation before the cameras rolled. And I laugh so hard when I look at these guys using the digital technology now, where you can just roll and roll and roll. And I'm thinking to myself, man, we would sit there for 2 hours going over, how we're going to shoot this one scene where the girl gets stabbed and she turns the camera, and we've got to make sure the focus is just right, just as she turns. And we're sitting there trying it again and again and again to get it right. And then finally, everyone's like, okay, ready? It's like going, lighting off a piece of dynamite. It's like, okay, we're ready to roll and go. And everybody's holding their breath and crossing their fingers that we get it right, because we didn't have another shot at it. So but that's exciting. That's exciting to do a film that way. I mean, I look back at that with very fond memories, because I'll never do that again. If the way digital technology is going, it looks like my next film will probably be shot digital. I've never done that before. I've always shot on film. This was shot on Super 35. But I look at that and say, I'm going to be so freed up to do experimental things and to try new things. But at the same time, the feeling of being a daredevil and the risk is all gone. So that element is taken away, and I'll always miss that.
So beyond the budget and your resources, what did you learn from Malevolence that you took to Bereavement?
I think one of the things I learned was to make sure that your script is in line. The script is the most important thing. And even on Bereavement, the film, it was such an ambitious project. And even after we wrapped, I realized I had so much more footage, so much more of this story than I needed to tell the story. And the original cut was much longer because, we just had so much information, but you can only tell so much in one story. And I think even now, learning from Malevolence and Bereavement, just, the script is king. It's so important to get everything right before you go out and shoot. You have to leave yourself a little element of, mystery. You have to leave yourself open to surprises, because certainly you're going to run into situations where someone has an idea, or you come up with an idea while you're making the movie that changes things. And sometimes you change one thing, especially in a script like this, you change one thing and it creates this ripple effect. It's like, oh, well, now I've got to change this, and now I've got to change this, and he says some dialogue that pertains to this, which we're now taking out, so now that's got to change. And it becomes this Rubik's Cube that you've got to constantly micromanage while trying to stay, on budget, on time, making sure everybody's doing what they're doing. So it becomes a very difficult process. But if your script is perfect going in, always, then you'll never have a problem. So for me, that's the number one thing that I've learned from it.
And being a man that does every job on this set too, I'd imagine that's key.
It could definitely make your head explode. And I realized too that everybody says that about me, that I wear all these hats and I do everything, and I thought maybe that was hyperbole, but then I look back and I realized that I definitely do have a problem with handing over tasks to other people. I think it's not necessarily 100% my fault, because a lot of times I'll do that and then somebody will do something and it's not what I wanted, and so I got to go and do it myself anyway.
So now, what was the casting process like for this one? Because your last one was your first feature. I'm sure you had to go out and find people. This one, did you get any attention yourself? Any interest coming back your way?
Well, actually, my second film, Brutal, the casting on that. Wait, I don't think I followed your question. Ask me that question again.
After the success of Malevolence,
right,
did you have any interest from talent's part, being part of a Bereavement?
Oh, yeah. And okay, that's how it dovetailed to the other question. Because yes, we did get a lot of interest, and instead of putting them in a horror film, I put them in a comedy. Because in Brutal Massacre, I actually got every genre guy that I ever, admired as a kid in my movie. I had Ken Faree from Dawn of the Dead, David Naughton from American Wolf in London. I had Brian O'Halloran, who I was a huge fan of Clerks, and we've become very close friends. Jerry Bednob, 40-Year-Old Virgin. All the ladies from The Evil Dead were in the film. Who else am I missing? And I apologize. Oh, Gunnar Hansen, for the original Leatherface from Texas Chainsaw.
You must have loved that.
Yeah, I've got all these horror guys, and what do? I put them in a comedy. But who knew that they were so talented, multi-talented? I mean, Gunnar is hysterical, I think. One of the funniest performances ever in a movie. So, but yeah, and that carried over because of the success of that. We certainly had interest with Bereavement. I had my pick of actors for this film. And but again, we ended up going with a lot of unknowns, and I'm so happy we did, because those unknowns have become, huge actors in their own right. I mean, look at Alex Daddario. She's now in Hall Pass, coming out in February 25th, Farrelly Brothers movie. She was the lead in Percy Jackson.
So you got her before those?
Oh yeah. Bereavement, as far as I know, Bereavement was her first lead role in a feature film. So, and she came to the set totally prepared, and we knew she was a superstar the minute she walked on the set. I mean, she was fantastic. So professional, so smart, so beautiful. And of course, we're not the only ones to recognize that, because she's doing really well. But there's also Nolan Funk, who's become famous in his own right. Of course, we got John Savage, Michael Biehn, who I'm a huge fan of. I've never seen a film of his that I didn't like, so he was a perfect choice for this movie. And then there's Brett Rickaby, who I think you remember him from The Crazies. He was definitely the standout. One of my favorite
movies of last year.
And he's the
his
standout.
Face,
yes.
I will never forget his face in that movie.
Yes. Well, he certainly brought it to Bereavement. It's over and above my wildest imaginations where he took the character for this film.
And what about Spencer and Peyton List?
Oh, God.
They're young children on this very brutal set. How do you handle that?
Yeah. It's so funny that you asked that, because Spencer, he's 9 years old, so smart, so talented. I mean, to be able to give off the emotional performance that he does in this film without saying a word, that's very difficult for any actor, especially a kid. And he does it, fantastic job. And then, a lot of people have asked me, what's it like, having them around this horrific set? And here's the kid who is complaining because he wanted to be able to stab his sister on screen instead of off camera, so it's like, probably giving something away there, but it's just, they were just a joy to work with. So professional for their age.
Were their parents on set?
Yeah, their parents were always on set, always monitoring everything that they were doing. And we were very careful not to expose them or Chase Pechisak, who was the young 6-year-old Martin, to anything, I think the only time we ever really experienced them reacting in a negative way to what was on, what they were involved with was young Chase was in a scene where he didn't really see anything, but he heard it. And the first time he heard the scream, he kind of cowered and just crumpled up into a ball, and I realized, okay, I can dub the screams in later. So we ended up having the girl just mime it, and then we overdubbed it, and that saved the day. But sometimes, yeah, I mean, even just the scream was just horrific.
And what about the rest of your cast too? I mean, even the older cast members, I'm sure that makes them uncomfortable to a point too.
No one was comfortable on the shoot. I'm not even comfortable with a lot of the subject matter that we shot. I mean, there were times when I was in the middle of a scene and I'm just thinking introspectively, like, what made me write this scene? Like, what was I thinking when I put this to paper? So, yeah, it was without a doubt, it was a very, very uncomfortable movie to make. And I think it shows even when you watch the finished product. There's no way you can be involved in a shoot like this and not have it affect you that way.
I think the two things have to go hand in hand, or you wouldn't have ended up with the result you had.
No, I mean, I'm literally hanging a girl by a real meat hook. She's got a little harness, but that is a real meat hook from the original Slaughterhouse. So that wheel, that hook, all that was it wasn't a prop. And, when we're hanging her on that pulley, that's the same pulley they used to wheel the pigs after they slit their throats over to the furnace. And, we're wheeling her on the exact same system, and she's hanging upside down. Luckily, she wasn't very heavy, but she was willing to do that and to take that risk. And there's no special effects in that scene. Even in the furnace scene, there's no special effects. Even the flames are real. It's all in-camera effects, and she was right in the middle of it. Very, very brave. That was Valentina DeAngelis. Very brave girl. And that was her first day on set. Very first day, she walks in, takes her coat off, and we attach a harness to her and hang her upside down. And it was like 10 degrees in that place, too.
What kind of pep talk do you give someone like that before you put her through it?
I didn't say anything, because I knew if I told her exactly what she's going to be experiencing, she'd probably get on the bus and get back to New York. So, but she was a trooper, just amazing. Everybody in this cast was so up to the challenge. Nobody complained.
That is a good group to have.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I couldn't have been luckier.
So now you mentioned you wrote 3 books. There are 3 parts to this?
No, it was one book.
One book.
That I broke into 3. It was like a 500-page novel.
Okay.
And I broke it up into 3 scripts. It was never meant to be a movie, but I realized that I could make it into a cool horror film, but it was just too much information. So that's why I split it out.
So still, you say 3 scripts. I see 2 movies.
Well, I mean, there's certainly a 3rd part of the trilogy if we ever get to that point.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I don't know. It really depends if people like the movie. If they like it, we'll do it. If not, we'll do something else.
And anything else coming up for you?
I have quite a few projects. I mean, nothing that I can announce yet, but there's actually a lot of stuff circling right now. So for me, it's a very exciting time.
Sticking within the genre?
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, I love the horror genre. It's certainly by far and away my favorite genre. So there's definitely if people want to see more of my stuff, there'll definitely be more horror stuff coming down the road.